Welcome to another episode of Living with Purpose. Today I have Dr. Julie Pham, an author with a best-selling book, Forms of Respect. But she is also the CEO of CuriosityBased, which is an organization that works with individuals and organizations in effective storytelling. But she is also a graduate and got her doctorate at Cambridge University, has been a pillar of the Vietnamese community here with a newsletter for the Vietnamese community, really exploring the impact of immigrants and how they get reintegrated into this community. So with that introduction, please join me in welcoming Dr. Julie Pham to Living with Purpose.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
So start off by talking about your journey. You have a very interesting journey. You have immigrant parents. So let's just start from the very beginning as to talk a little bit about your parents and then how you grew up, how that helped form some of your foundations and values and purpose.
So a really important part of my identity is being a Vietnamese person, a Vietnamese refugee. So my parents and I came over to the U.S. when I was a 2-month-old baby. And so that was in 1979. And my parents founded the first private Vietnamese newspaper in the Pacific Northwest, so in the Seattle area. And that was in 1986. So I always grew up in this Vietnamese community and being really proud of being a refugee. I know for some people, being a refugee is something that some people might feel ashamed of. And yet growing up, my parents were always giving me the message that, look at how much we've done. Look at our community. To be a refugee means to be courageous, to be resilient, to be able to come over here. So yes, that was the environment that I grew up in. And then I helped my parents. I never thought I would work at the newspaper. But I actually ended up, after I finished my PhD, I actually ended up coming back to work at the newspaper. That was 2008 during the Great Recession.
So let's not skip over these long time frames. Right, so you grew up in Seattle. Where did you grow up in Seattle?
We moved around a lot. My brothers were born in Tacoma. We were in South King County and Federal Way in Auburn, in Beacon Hill, and which is a neighborhood in Seattle, a lot in the Rainier Valley. And then eventually we made our way to Bellevue.
And where did you did your schooling?
So I did my undergraduate at Berkeley. So Newport High School, which is Bellevue. And so I always went to public schools.
So you went into the public school. Talk a little bit about your life there, right? I mean, what were the kinds of issues you were interested in, the friendships you developed? Talk just a little bit about your growing up so the readers can actually get a sense, or the listeners can get a sense of the environment that shaped you.
By the time I was in 6th grade, we had moved to Bellevue, which is a suburb of Seattle, and they have really great public schools. And I think that was a pivotal move, actually, because there, the expectation was people would go to college.
Yeah.
It was more about which college you would go to. It wasn't a question of whether you would go to college. And so it was pretty competitive. And the expectation was that people would excel. And so what I realized was that who you surround yourself with, your friendships make a big difference. And so, for example, my parents thought, okay, you'll go to the University of Washington, which is a great public school. I have friends, though, who were they're going to Berkeley, to Harvard, to Ivy Leagues. And so that's when I started thinking, oh, I can actually go out of state. And then even when I got to Berkeley, I met someone who said, well, who went to Cambridge? You can go to Cambridge. And so what I learned early on is who you surround yourself with. If they are a few steps ahead of you and they're excelling, they will push you to excel. And so that's what I got.
Were you helping out with your parents in the newspaper?
Oh, yeah.
So tell a little bit about what did that mean, right? I mean, this is the family. It's not the Seattle Times, right? So you're kind of, it's hustling the whole time.
Oh, yes. And back then, I mean, in the 90s, you would print out the articles and paste them up, rolling them with wax, cutting with an X-Acto knife on these big pieces of laminate plastic. And so I grew up, one of my jobs was to cut these big sheets of plastic. It was to replace the dates, what they call the folios. And so, we would spend a lot of time in the office. And so we would even do the school fundraisers. We would bring our good self chocolate bunnies and other things like that. And so we would always watch our parents, the commerce in and out, and we would play. It was right on Martin Luther King Way. And then also my parents thought it was really important for us to always visit our customers, our advertisers. And so it was about how do we support one another? How is there always reciprocity? So I just grew up with that spirit of also asking for help too, because my parents were able to do things that were much bigger than you'd think that you'd be capable of. And I think that this is actually really true for the Vietnamese community in Seattle. We're able to punch above our weight class because we help one another. It was really difficult to get institutional loans.
Right.
And so the way we would do this is by supporting one another. And so people who were a bit more successful would lend money. And when you got to that point, then you would also do that as well.
And so you were part of the Vietnamese community. You were in Bellevue. There was a community, but, the Vietnamese community is also spread out in Seattle. So talk a little bit about what that was like growing up in that environment.
There's a lot of pride in Vietnamese heritage. So there would be the festivals. There's the big festival at the Seattle Center. I remember the Lunar New Year festivals and selling or having a booth there. There's a big Catholic community and Buddhist community.
Mm-hmm.
My family is Catholic. So yes, that was a really important part of my identity. Yeah, I'll tell you, Akhtar, it wasn't until after college did I start studying Vietnamese. So I spoke Vietnamese until I was age 5, and then I went to the school system. And this is because I grew up in a time during assimilation.
Right.
So it was very much, hey, you've got to speak English. It's more important for you to speak English than to preserve the language. I think that's very different now when people want their kids to speak 3 different languages.
Right.
And so it wasn't until after college did I start formally studying Vietnamese, and that's because research was on Vietnamese history. And I'm actually really grateful that I studied it as an adult, because I think I have a much deeper appreciation. And so for the first 20 years of my life, I spoke in English with my parents. And then I learned Vietnamese, and I was learning academic Vietnamese, so my language was quite deep. And so when I came back to Seattle, I had a whole different relationship with it.
Yeah.
And it really made me appreciate, wow, how much language has to do with how we express ourselves, because it wasn't until then that I realized how limited my parents' English was. And so when I came back to Seattle and I was working at the newspaper, I would help my father edit his emails in English. And that's when I realized how much charisma he had, because you could feel that through even the limited English. And it also, it really made me appreciate how much my parents had to navigate despite their language.
Right. And the paper was in Vietnamese, or was
Yeah, the paper is in Vietnamese.
The paper is in Vietnamese. So you kind of had this experience growing up. You move away to Berkeley, which is this complete different world.
Mm-hmm.
Talk a little bit about that, and then how did that unfold into other things that you started doing?
Berkeley's very, very liberal. And the Vietnamese community is the Vietnamese refugee community, the South Vietnamese refugee community is very anti-communist. And so, the left is great. and so when I got to Berkeley, and I started to be in these very progressive groups. And so I started doing research actually on the South Vietnamese military perspective of the Vietnam War. I studied history. And that's when I realized that normally the Vietnam War is seen as being between Americans and Vietnamese. And the Vietnamese are de facto the North Vietnamese, the communists, and yet the South Vietnamese are really overlooked in that. And my family's South Vietnamese.
Right.
And so in any case, Akhtar, this really, being a historian it's a very strong part of my identity, because it helps me understand that there are different perspectives. And so then later on, I decided to pursue a PhD, and I lived in Vietnam. And my PhD is actually about a South Vietnamese communist revolutionary. So this is the opposite side. Diem Mun Dao, he led the 1945 revolution against the French in South Vietnam. And he was born in 1910. And so I actually got to interview him 16 times before he passed away. So I'm seeing a totally different perspective. I grew up in a very anti-communist refugee community. And I studied that perspective as an undergrad. And then here I am doing my dissertation on one of the biggest communist leaders in Vietnam. And so one of the things I like to illustrate that multiple truths can coexist in the US is known as the Fall of Saigon.
Yeah.
In communist Vietnam, it's known as Liberation Day. And for the South Vietnamese refugee community like my own, it's known as the day we lost our country.
Yeah.
And all three are true. And so that's for me, keep that in mind, that multiple truths can coexist, and that's about perspective taking. And how do we honor different truths?
And that's fascinating, right? I mean, a lot of people who grow up living in these multiple truths. We are living in a multiple truth in this society right now, right, in this country, in terms of different perspectives, different approaches, and how people are seeing things. So talk about how does that then shape into what you're doing today?
So I, as a historian, I know that later on, the way we look at something when we're in it and how we look at it later on changes. And so my work is all around curiosity as a practice in helping organizations practice curiosity. And that means acknowledging we are all curious, but it can be hard to practice curiosity.
Yeah.
And so that practice of curiosity has three elements. There is self-awareness, relationship building, and clear communication. So that is, how do I get curious about myself? How do I practice inward curiosity? How do I then get curious about other people and let them get curious about me? That is relationship building. And then clear communication is, how do I listen to understand, ask questions when I don't, and be specific with my examples and stories. And so even in the workplace, people think that there's right or wrong. And actually, there are some things that, that's against the handbook, or that's illegal, right? There's some others that are anti-compliance, but actually there are a lot of things that are very gray.
Yes.
And yet we act as if, we talk about it as if it's true or false. And so actually that then goes into my work around respect, because when we talk about respect, we think about it in this binary of respect versus disrespect. By not getting treated the way I want, that means it's disrespect. And versus saying, hey, how do you want respect? This is how I want respect. Maybe we want it differently.
Talking about your book and 7 forms of respect, talk a little bit about that, right? I mean, why is that important for people that actually need to show up in an authentic way? Which is essentially what you're really trying to talk about, is how do we all show up authentically and allow each other to communicate and work with each other in an effective way.
Yeah, and so I'll just say that 7 forms of respect is more like 5 love languages, not like 7 habits of highly effective people.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is it's not about getting all 7 forms. Some people hear the title and they think, oh, these are the 7 ways I need to be respectful. And actually, at the core, it's about how we can agree what respect feels like, to feel seen, heard, acknowledged. We disagree on what does it look like.
Right.
What does it look like? So, Actor, I know you spent a long time in the tech industry. So, for example, in the tech industry, there's a lot of use of profanity.
Of course.
And for some people, that feels authentic. I can cuss at work. And for other people, that feels incredibly violent and disrespectful.
Yeah.
Why would you use those words? That's one of those areas that respect is actually relative. It's relative, it's dynamic, it's subjective, and it's also contradictory. And so at the heart of 7 forms of respect, it's actually, how do we get curious about respect? How do we, instead of saying, this is what you need to do and not do, how do we try to understand how I want respect and then how you want respect? And then in the workplace, to understand that I'm not always going to get what I want.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, even you said it, like, how do we show up authentically? Yeah, but maybe if I'm showing up authentically and then that means I use a lot of profanity, that makes some other people feel incredibly uncomfortable. So we as a collective have to decide, okay, what is actually needed here? How do we actually need to show, what are the forms of respect we're going to prioritize as a collective? And I know you have an international audience, so I'm just going to share another analogy I like to use when we think about respect in the workplace. There is respect at the organizational level. Whatever at the organizational level, the CEO, the leadership, whatever they prioritize, the top 2 or 3 forms of respect they prioritize, I liken that to the national language.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are the different departments. There's engineering, there's marketing, there's finance. They have their own functions. and they have their own leaders and their own personalities.
Right.
I liken that to the regional dialects. And then there's me, the individual. And I have my own priorities too. The people who can do best in any organization are multilingual.
Right.
They can go to marketing or to finance or to engineering and go, oh, I know that these are the forms that they're going to prioritize here. Is that going to be procedure? Is that going to be candor? They can be multilingual. And so it's not about always getting what I want. It's about understanding, about getting clarity and alignment. And so to shift this conversation away from respect versus disrespect to how do we get more alignment around what we mean by respect?
So having written the book, what's next?
The book is for the workplace, and I've been getting a lot of requests for 7 forms of respect in our personal lives. Because people have told me, hey, I'm using this with my kids. I'm using this with, and in the beginning I said I likened it to the 5 love languages. Love and respect are different.
So let's talk a little bit about purpose, right? So here you have this fantastic journey. Clearly, purpose is important for you. So talk a little bit about why you believe purpose is important and how you use purpose, especially when the times get tough.
Yes. Purpose reminds us, this is why I'm here. And I think a purpose is actually, it's a combination of something that I care about and that I'm uniquely good at.
Yeah.
So for me, my purpose, I am able to listen and to bring out conversations and to practice curiosity with people in ways that they tell me things that maybe they didn't tell other people. And then I'm able to distill that and find meaning out of that, larger meaning out of that. What am I uniquely good at? And what do I care about? And so that then drives my work because actually there are things that I'm good at that I don't particularly care about, right? And so there's some things I care about and that I'm not particularly good at, but that purpose being the both of those.
So how does this translate then? How are you using purpose? Because I see purpose as something that is very inherent to you. I was interviewing somebody else the other day, and they basically made a very interesting point that you don't discover purpose. You actually remember purpose. Like purpose is always within you. It's just when do you remember it? And then when you show up. And I've always felt that purpose, the remembrance of purpose comes in when times get tough. Because that's the time when you are actually torn between your values, your strengths, what you're good at, what you care about, and all of these other factors that surround it. So talk a little bit about how you have been able to manage as you've gone through these different journeys of yours.
I left a job I loved. It was the best job I ever had to start CuriosityBased in 2021. And I felt that it wasn't because I was following my passion. It was because I had a calling. And you could say that was because I had this purpose. Definitely, I like the idea that purpose is something we remember. And I don't think of just purpose as being in the individual sense. I actually talk to my clients and I try to ask them, what is the purpose of your work? Good. The purpose of your team. Because that is why you are together. You're not here just to make money. What are you uniquely good at and what do you like doing? And how can that serve other people? And to be clear about that.
Yeah, and of course, the work that we all do is about getting, organizations need to have a purpose. As much as individuals need to have a purpose, organizations need to have a purpose. Most organizations have a mission and vision statement, their value statements articulated, but they never really focus on the why.
I really love saying purpose instead of mission.
Yeah. And there is a difference between purpose and mission, right? Purpose is the why, mission is the how, vision is the what. So you kind of have to get people to think through that. And so as we come to the end, I want you to share your one golden nugget, your piece of wisdom that you want to leave our listeners with.
Yes. So when talking about respect, a lot of people talk about the golden rule, treat people the way you want to be treated, or the platinum rule, treat people the way they want to be treated. I actually have what I call the rubber band rule. The rubber band rule. And I have a rubber band here. And so the rubber band rule shows, hey, we can all stretch because I want to be respectful. Actually, I want to be respectful. So I'll stretch for you. Even though I'm kind of ambivalent about how you want to be respected, I'll stretch for you. Think about when we're in times where some people want, for example, to be CC'd on all emails. And I don't really like to do that, but I'll do it because I know that other people can't. And so what happens is we're stretching and we're stretching. And so sometimes we're in groups or situations where we want to be respectful, but we stretch and we stretch and we stretch until. And so the rubber band rule is about knowing, what are my breaking points? What is going to make me snap? And that's actually about self-awareness, and it's about self-respect. Because oftentimes, because we want to serve other people, because we want to be respectful for other people, we forget ourselves.
Yeah.
But we forget to ask ourselves, what matters to me? And what's that based on? So that's my golden nugget, is to remember the rubber band rule of respect.
I love it. So you should be able to stretch, but you should also recognize when you will break.
Yes.
And that's really self-awareness that allows you to do that.
And also think about your rubber band is going to change depending on the context. I'm way more stretchy at home than I am at work. Right?
Yeah.
Think about who I stretch for, how I for my family, way more than I would for my colleagues.
Correct.
So
correct. And it's context-based.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's, the heart of 7 Forms of Respect, like I said, is around curiosity. And part of that curiosity is to understand the context, because the context is what makes respect dynamic. It's not a rule. It's not always this. It actually changes. Right. And how do we articulate that? How do we identify and then articulate it?
Julie, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Again, the rubber band rule.
Yes, you heard it here.
You heard it here. Get a book. For those that are interested, I'm sure it's on Amazon and local bookstores that you support. Purpose is that renewable source of energy that continues to drive humanity forward. Remember the rubber band rule. Julie, thank you so very much for being part of this podcast. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much.